For 2 centuries, the stars had called, and Earth had not answered. This was the fact that defined the age, the singular, confounding, endlessly debated fact that every diplomatic historian in the Galactic Cooperative had spent 200 years trying to explain and had never adequately managed. Other species, upon developing faster-than-light travel, did what every species in recorded history had done. They reached. They expanded. They made contact. They joined the slow, complex, rewarding conversation of civilizations that had been ongoing for thousands of years across the inhabited arm of the galaxy. It was simply what intelligent species did when they were capable of it. Humanity became capable of it 203 years ago. The Cooperative's long-range observation posts had recorded the moment precisely. A human vessel, ungainly by later standards, burning a stuttering experimental hyperdrive on its maiden voyage, jumping from the space near their pale blue world to the edge of their own solar system, and back again in 40 minutes. The observation post had flagged it immediately. The Cooperative's first contact division had begun preparing. And then, with a patience that no one in the galaxy had anticipated and no one had ever quite been able to categorize as either wisdom or stubbornness, humanity had simply stopped. They had not expanded. They had not broadcast greetings into the dark. They had not sent vessels to neighboring stars. They had turned their hyperdrive technology inward, testing, refining, making it better in ways that the Cooperative's analysts could observe only partially through long-range instruments. And they had gone quiet, and they had stayed quiet, and they had remained quiet for so long that the First Contact Division's preparatory files had been archived, retrieved, re-archived, and finally moved to a historical subfolder that no one checked anymore. 200 years. That was how long Earth had ignored the galaxy. Not because they didn't know it was there. The Cooperative was reasonably certain they knew. Human communications were loud even when they weren't trying to broadcast outward, and the content of those communications made clear that humanity was aware of the broader universe and had opinions about it. Passionate, contradictory, endlessly debated opinions. Because having passionate, contradictory, endlessly debated opinions about everything appeared to be a fundamental characteristic of the species. They knew the galaxy existed. They had chosen, for reasons that no outside observer had successfully determined, not to engage with it. Until the morning, Cooperative Standard Time, which translated to a crisp Tuesday in what the humans called November, when Senior Analyst Veth of the First Contact Division's reactivated emergency desk looked at her sensor feed and said, in a voice that came out considerably quieter than she intended, "That cannot be right." Her assistant, a young cooperative officer named Prail, leaned over her console, looked at the feed, looked again. "How many?" he said. "I'm still counting," Veth said. She was. It was taking longer than she expected. The answer, when the count was complete, was 412 vessels. They had appeared at the edge of the Cooperative's monitored space simultaneously. Not in sequence, not in the staggered emergence pattern of a fleet making coordinated jumps from multiple departure points, but all at once, within a window of 11 seconds, as though they had been waiting in formation somewhere beyond sensor range and had crossed the threshold together on a signal. The vessels were human. That much was clear from the emission profiles, the hull geometry visible on the optical feeds, and the communications frequencies they were broadcasting on, the same frequencies humanity used internally, now carrying a tight beam signal directed precisely at the Cooperative's nearest communication relay. The vessels were not small. The Cooperative Standard warship, the Sentinel class, which had served as the backbone of collective defense for 300 years, measured 800 meters from bow to stern and massed approximately 9 million metric tons. The human vessels on Veth's sensor display were not uniform in size, which was itself interesting. The smallest, clustered in formation at the fleet's outer edges, measured approximately 600 meters. The largest, a category of vessel represented by 11 examples, positioned at the fleet's center in a formation that every tactical analysis algorithm Veth ran independently identified as a command and protection arrangement. Measured between 3 and 4 kilometers in length, and carried mass readings that her console's upper display limit was not designed to accommodate. Prail was running the tactical overlay with the focused intensity of someone who had trained for emergency scenarios and was now in one. Point defense arrays, he said, reading from his console. Missile batteries. What looks like, he paused, rechecked the reading, directed energy emplacements on every vessel, including the small ones. Active, Veth said. Passive, he said. Nothing targeting, nothing charged. All systems appear to be in standby. He looked at her. They're not pointing anything at us. No, she said. They're just there. The tight beam signal from the human fleet was repeating, patient and steady, waiting to be received. Veth reached for her console and opened the channel. This is Senior Analyst Veth of the Galactic Cooperative First Contact Division, she said, keeping her voice as even as she could manage. We are receiving your transmission. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. There was a pause of approximately 8 seconds, the lightspeed delay across the distance between the fleet and the relay, and then a voice came back. Human, female, accented in the particular way of someone speaking a language they had learned rather than grown up with, but speaking it well. Calm. The voice of someone who had made important transmissions before and was not rattled by the size of this one. Senior Analyst Veth, this is Admiral Constance Mura of the Earth Unified Fleet. We apologize for the unannounced arrival. We thought it was time to introduce ourselves properly. We're requesting permission to approach and begin formal diplomatic contact. A pause, and then, with a quality that Veth would later describe in her official report as simultaneously reassuring and deeply unsettling. We come in peace. We've been planning this for a while. We're looking forward to the conversation. The Cooperative's Diplomatic Council convened in emergency session within 4 hours. 49 member species, represented either in person or by high-speed holographic link, assembled in the Grand Council chamber on the Cooperative's central station. A vast, ancient space that smelled of centuries and had hosted more important conversations than any other room in the inhabited galaxy. Director Oren, who led the Diplomatic Council, opened the session by stating the facts plainly, which was his habit and which everyone appreciated, because the facts were already alarming enough without embellishment. An Earth fleet of 412 vessels has appeared at the edge of monitored space, he said. They have requested diplomatic contact. Their fleet has made no hostile moves. All weapon systems are passive. They are holding position and waiting for our response. He looked around the chamber. I want to address the first question everyone is asking, which is, why 412 vessels for a first contact? He pulled up the tactical overlay on the chamber's central display, the image that Veth's console had generated, the human fleet in its careful formation, the 11 great ships at its center like a heart surrounded by ribs. We don't know, he said honestly. We have theories. I'll share them. First theory, this is a demonstration of capability rather than an aggressive posture. They're showing us what they have, not threatening us with it. Second theory, the fleet composition, support vessels, science ships, what appear to be hospital ships, alongside the warships, suggests this is not a military expedition. It's an entire civilization arriving to meet us. Third theory, which I want to put on the table because it needs to be said, 200 years is a long time. Whatever humanity has been doing for 200 years, they have been doing it with the full resources of an industrialized, intelligent, highly motivated species. The fleet we are looking at may not be the totality of what they have built. It may be representative. The chamber absorbed this. Representative Fal of the Sorin Collective, an ancient and precise being who had served on the Diplomatic Council for 60 years, raised one of her 6 hands. Director Oren. In the Cooperative's history, when a new species makes first contact, the standard delegation is between 1 and 5 vessels. The record is 11, set by the Methara when they joined 300 years ago, and it was considered extraordinary at the time. Yes, Oren said. 412, Fal said. With 11 vessels of a class we have no classification for. Yes, they've been preparing this for 200 years. That is our assessment. Director, Fal said, with the specific precision of a being who had spent 60 years on the Diplomatic Council and had learned exactly when careful language was required. I want to suggest that we approach this conversation with the complete attention it deserves. All of it, every detail. because I suspect that what we say in the next 72 hours will matter for a very long time." Oren nodded. "That," he said, "is exactly what I intend." Admiral Constance Mura had been preparing for this conversation for most of her professional life, which was an accurate statement and also somewhat misleading, because everyone who had been selected for the Earth Unified Fleet's first contact mission had been preparing for most of their professional lives. That was the point. That had always been the point. She stood on the bridge of the EUS Enduring Promise, flagship of the first contact mission, 4 kilometers from bow to stern, carrying a crew of 6,000 and enough redundant systems to keep operating through damage levels that would have killed 3 of her predecessor ship classes. And she watched the cooperative's communication relay on the forward display with the particular quality of stillness that came from being somewhere she had imagined for 20 years, and finding that the reality was, in its own way, more than the imagination had been. The Enduring Promise was the largest ship humanity had ever built. She was also the 43rd largest in the fleet currently surrounding her, because humanity had had 200 years and had used the time thoroughly. Mura had served in the Earth Unified Fleet for 31 years. She had commanded vessels of progressively larger size and responsibility for 20 of those years. She had been selected for the first contact mission 12 years ago, which meant 12 years of additional preparation, language training, diplomatic protocol study, xenobiology briefings, 12 years of reading every piece of information about the galactic cooperative that humanity's long-range observation posts had gathered over 2 centuries. She spoke fluent cooperative standard. She understood the Council's political structure, its historical tensions, its member species' individual cultural frameworks, better than many cooperative citizens understood them. This was not an accident. Nothing about this mission was an accident. Admiral, her communications officer, Lieutenant Commander Yoon, turned from his console. "The cooperative has responded. Director Oren of the Diplomatic Council is requesting a direct channel." "Open it," she said. The main display shifted. The tactical feed went to a secondary screen, and the primary filled with the image of a cooperative diplomat, Director Oren, a species Mura recognized from her briefings as Velhari, silver-tipped fingers, calm and measuring eyes, carrying the particular quality of composed authority that came from having managed important things for a long time. "Admiral Mura," he said. His cooperative standard was impeccable, as expected. "Director Oren," she said. "Thank you for taking our call." A brief pause, the transmission delay. Then Oren's expression shifted just slightly at the corner, something that in a human face would have been the beginning of a smile. "We appreciate your patience," he said. "I want to be direct with you, Admiral, because I think directness will serve us both well. Your arrival has caused considerable discussion within the Council." "I imagine it has," she said. 412 vessels is not a standard first contact delegation." "No," Oren said. "It is not. I'd like to understand the reasoning if you're willing to share it." Mura had prepared for this question. She had several prepared answers. She chose the honest one because her read of Oren from his public record suggested he would respond better to honesty than to diplomatic packaging. "Director Oren," she said, "humanity has been watching your cooperative for approximately 200 years. We've observed your history, your politics, your member species, your conflicts, your successes. We respect what you've built enormously." She paused to let the transmission cross the distance. "We've also observed that the galaxy is large, that not every species in it shares your cooperative's values, and that in the 200 years since we developed hyperdrive technology, we chose not to join a conversation we weren't prepared for." She met his gaze through the screen. "We're prepared now. The fleet you're looking at represents our introduction, not a threat, not a demonstration of aggression, but an honest presentation of who we are. We didn't want to arrive as something we weren't. We didn't want to shake hands and then 6 months later have to say, actually, here's the rest of it. We wanted you to see us clearly from the beginning." Another transmission pause. Oren was still for a moment. Then he said, "You wanted to be understood accurately." "Yes," she said. "From the first moment." He was quiet for a few seconds more. Then he said, "Admiral Mura, I would like to invite you to a formal diplomatic meeting at our central station. Your flagship and a delegation of your choosing. Safe passage is extended fully and without condition." He paused. "I'd also like to tell you something off the formal record, if I may." "Please," she said. "In my career," he said, "I have managed 47 first contact events. In 47 events, I have never had a species arrive and tell me, 'We wanted you to see us clearly.'" He held her gaze across the light seconds between them. "That is either the most sophisticated diplomatic opening I have ever encountered or the most genuine. I find myself hopping it is the latter." "Director Oren," Mura said, "it is both, and we are very good at both." She watched the slight shift in his expression as the words arrived. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I'm beginning to understand that." And the long conversation that had been 200 years in the making finally, properly, began. The journey of the enduring promise to the cooperative's central station took 18 hours at the speed Mura chose. Not the ship's best speed, which would have covered the distance in 4, but a measured pace that gave the cooperative's population and council time to observe the approach of a 4-kilometer vessel and not experience it as alarming. The fleet remained at the border, holding position, passive and patient. 18 hours was a long time to be patient when you were this close. Mura used the time for preparation. Her senior diplomatic team, 12 specialists who between them covered xenobiology, interspecies law, economic theory, military protocol, and the specific cultural nuances of 9 of the cooperative's 49 member species, ran their final briefings. Her communications team finalized the data packages that would be offered to the cooperative as part of the formal introduction. A comprehensive overview of human history, culture, technology, and governance, prepared over 8 years by a team of 5,000 specialists, and reviewed 17 times before being certified for release. The package was thorough. It included the wars. It included the famines, the failures, the centuries of self-inflicted wounds that human history was full of. The decision to include all of it had been debated fiercely. There were those who argued that a diplomatic introduction should lead with strengths, and the debate had been settled, finally, by the mission's chief diplomatic architect, a historian named Dr. James Acaffer, who had said, "We are asking the galaxy to trust us. We cannot ask for trust by showing them only what we want them to see. Show them everything. Let them decide." The data package showed everything. On the 15th hour of the approach, Mura's personal communications chimed. It was Acaffer, calling from his station 2 decks below the bridge. He was 70 years old, small, thin, with the particular energy of someone who had spent 50 years caring intensely about exactly one thing and had not lost a gram of that intensity. "We're really doing this," he said. It was not a question. He had spent 30 years helping design this mission, and he had still not quite, Mura thought, stopped being amazed that it was happening. "We're really doing this," she confirmed. "Are you ready?" He laughed, a short, genuine sound. "I've been ready for 30 years, he said. "I'm also terrified, which I think is appropriate." "It is," she said. "James, the data package, the full history, the decision to include everything. What about it? Was it the right call?" He was quiet for a moment. "When I was 23 years old," he said, "I read an account of the cooperative's founding, the documents from the first 5 member species, the debates they had, the arguments about what kind of organization this was going to be. And there was a line in one of the founding documents from the Velhari representative, a very old diplomat named something I can never pronounce correctly that I have carried ever since. What did it say? It said, 'A civilization's character is not shown in its triumphs. Any species can point to its victories. Character is shown in how a civilization accounts for its failures, whether it faces them, learns from them, carries them forward as knowledge rather than shame.'" He paused. "We put everything in the package, Constance, because that's who we want to be when we walk in that door. Not a species showing its mettle, a species that has earned the right to walk in that door by knowing, honestly, what it cost." Mura was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Get some rest, James. Big day tomorrow." "Sleep," he said with affectionate scorn, "is for people who haven't been waiting 200 years. He cut the channel. She looked at the stars ahead of the enduring promise, the distant glint of the cooperative's central station growing slowly brighter with each passing hour. She thought about 200 years. She thought about what it meant to be the species that had waited, not from fear, not from indifference, but from the specific, disciplined patience of people who understood that doing something this important required doing it right. The central station was larger than the enduring promise, which Mura had known intellectually, and which was still on approach, an experience that adjusted something in her sense of scale. It was ancient. The cooperative's records put its construction at over 1,000 years ago, though significant portions had been rebuilt and expanded since. And it showed its age in the way that things built to last showed their age, not in deterioration, but in the accumulated weight of everything that had happened inside its walls. She had read those histories. She thought about them as the enduring promise matched velocity and approach vector, with the docking guidance the station's traffic control was providing. The voices of the controllers in accented but clear cooperative standard, professional and precise, in the way of people who docked extraordinary things routinely. The docking bay they had been assigned was the largest on the station, expanded, according to the station master's communication, in the 12 hours since Mura's fleet had appeared, specifically to accommodate the enduring promise. She had thanked the station master genuinely. The preparation it represented, the practical, immediate adjustment to a new reality, told her something useful about the cooperative. They adapted. They made room. She filed it. The formal reception was held in the station's grand diplomatic hall, a vast, high-ceilinged space with the particular quality of light that came through viewports facing the star, warm and clear, and walls lined with the representations of every species that had ever joined the cooperative, their forms ranging from the towering to the microscopic, rendered in the varied artistic styles of their own cultures. Mura walked into the hall with her senior team behind her and found the cooperative's council waiting. Not all 49 member species. That would be the formal session tomorrow, but the core diplomatic leadership, Director Oren at the center, flanked by 10 senior representatives. She had studied their files. She recognized each of them. She had the specific feeling of meeting people she knew from reading and finding that knowing them from reading and knowing them in person were two different kinds of knowledge, and that the second was going to require updating the first. Oren stepped forward. Up close, he was taller than she'd estimated from the screen. Velhari ran tall, and his silver-tipped fingers were folded in the formal greeting posture she had spent 6 months learning to read correctly. "Admiral Mura," he said. "Welcome to the Galactic Cooperative." "Director Oren," she said, "thank you for having us." They shook hands. She had offered it, having learned that Velhari diplomatic practice included the gesture when dealing with species that used it, and Oren received it without hesitation, which told her his preparation had been as thorough as hers. Then he gestured toward the reception space, and they walked together, and the long conversation continued. The formal diplomatic session ran for 3 days. On the first day, the Cooperative's Council heard the human delegation's formal introduction, Mura's opening statement, which she had written herself and revised 40 times, followed by the transfer of the data package, followed by a structured presentation by Akafer and 2 of his team members covering the broad arc of human history, civilization, and current governance. The Council listened. They listened in the specific, complete way of beings who understood that they were receiving important information and intended to use it. There were questions, many of them, detailed and intelligent and occasionally pointed in ways that confirmed Mura's reading of specific council members from their public records. Representative Fal of the Sorin Collective asked, with the precision of someone who had spent 60 years on this council, why humanity had chosen to wait 200 years. Mura had prepared for this question. She gave the answer she had prepared, and it was true. 2 reasons, she said. The first is readiness. We watched the cooperative for 2 centuries, and we saw a civilization of extraordinary depth and complexity, built by species with frameworks and histories very different from ours. We wanted to understand it before we tried to join it. We wanted to come to this table informed. She paused. The second reason is harder to explain simply, but I'll try. Humanity has a history of walking into situations before we fully understand them and causing damage we then spend generations repairing. We have done this with our own planet, with our own peoples, with each other. It is perhaps our most persistent flaw. She looked at Representative Fal directly. We did not want to do it with the galaxy. The chamber was quiet. You waited, Fal said slowly, because you were afraid of your own potential to cause harm. We waited, Mura said, because we respected your community enough to make sure we were ready to be part of it without breaking anything. Fal was still for a long moment. Then she said, "In 60 years on this council, Admiral, I have not heard that answer." "I hope it was the right one to give," Mura said. "Yes," Fal said. "It was." On the second day, the discussion turned to practical matters: trade frameworks, communication protocols, the specific legal questions raised by humanity's status as a co-sovereign civilization seeking cooperative membership, while maintaining an independent military structure of the scale the fleet at the border represented. These were complicated questions. The human delegation had prepared for them. The data packages included proposed frameworks, drafted by legal specialists who had studied the cooperative's internal law for years, and the cooperative's legal advisors found them. Mura could see it in their expressions as they reviewed the documents. Thorough. Unexpectedly thorough. "Your legal team," said the cooperative's chief legal advisor, a Marin named Counselor Sell, at one point, looking up from a tablet with an expression that mixed professional respect with something approaching astonishment, "has cited cooperative precedents from the last 400 years in the framework proposals." "Yes," said Mura's lead legal specialist, a human named Dr. Petra Volkov, who had spent 20 years studying interstellar law and had the contained enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting a long time to have this specific conversation. "We found the cooperative's legal archive's external transmissions comprehensive enough to work from. We tried to stay within your existing frameworks where possible rather than proposing entirely new structures. We thought that would be more useful." Sell looked at the tablet. "This citation," she said, pointing, "references a ruling from 312 years ago that was superseded by a subsequent ruling 40 years later. The subsequent ruling would actually serve your purpose better." "Oh," Volkov said, making a note with the speed of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of input. "Yes, thank you." "That's what we wanted," the conversation. Sell looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, to no one in particular, "I think I'm going to enjoy working with these people." On the third day, Oren asked to meet with Mura privately. They sat in a smaller room off the Grand Diplomatic Hall, just the two of them and their respective translators, though both of them were conducting the conversation in cooperative standard without needing them. Tea had been provided, a Velhari preparation that Mura had read about and found in practice to be simultaneously more complex and more calming than the description had suggested. "I want to speak frankly," Oren said. "Please," she said. "The cooperative has 49 member species," he said. "We have been building this community for over 1,000 years. In that time, we have had conflicts, failures, betrayals, and the kinds of painful lessons that communities of intelligent beings inevitably accumulate. We are not naive about what it means to add a new member." He held her gaze. "The fleet at our border," he said, 412 vessels. I've thought about it for 3 days. I've read your history. I understand the reasoning you gave me, honest presentation, showing yourselves clearly. I believe that reasoning is true." "It is," she said. "It is also true," he said carefully, "that the fleet represents a military capability that, by our analysis, exceeds the combined defensive capacity of the cooperative's current member species." He said it plainly, without alarm, as a fact that needed to be on the table. Mura did not look away. "Yes," she said. He nodded. "I want to ask you a direct question." "Ask it." "In your 200 years of preparation, in everything you built and learned and planned, what is it that you want? Not from the cooperative, not from membership or trade or diplomatic recognition. What does humanity actually want at the bottom of it?" Mura was quiet for a moment. This was the question she had thought about longest in 12 years of preparation. She had many answers. She chose the truest one. "We want to belong to something worth belonging to," she said. "We have spent most of our history alone, not physically alone, but alone in the sense that matters, the sense of being part of something larger than your own survival. We've been reaching for that our entire existence, in different ways, some of them terrible." She set down her tea. "We built the fleet because we are what we are, a species that has never been able to stop preparing for the worst while hopping for the best. We built it because we looked at the galaxy and understood that it was complicated, that not every part of it shared your cooperative's values, and that we were not willing to join a community only to watch something happen to it that we could have prevented." She met his gaze. "We built it because we intend to be useful, not dominant, not in charge. Useful in the way that a member of a community is useful, doing the part of the work that they are suited for, so that the whole thing holds together. Oren was quiet for a long time, long enough that the silence had texture, had weight, had the quality of a very old being sitting with something significant. Then he said, with a quietness that carried, "In 1,000 years of building this community, I have never had a species tell me that." "Was it what you needed to hear?" she said. He looked out the viewport at the stars, the ancient, steady light of a galaxy full of civilizations trying, imperfectly and with great effort, to make something good. "Yes," he said, "I believe it was." The formal membership vote was held on the fourth day. 49 member species. The result was announced by Director Oren at the conclusion of the session, in the grand diplomatic hall with the full council present and Mura's delegation, seated across the table, and the faces of 6,000 crew members watching on the Enduring Promises main screens simultaneously. The vote was 47 in favor, 2 abstentions, 0 opposed. The 2 abstentions, Mura had expected them, knew their reasoning from her preparation, and respected that the species in question had legitimate historical reasons for caution about large military powers. Had each sent her a private message beforehand explaining their position and expressing their hope that the abstention would be understood not as hostility, but as the specific caution of peoples who had learned caution the hard way. She had responded to both messages personally, at length, and had told them honestly that she understood, and that humanity would work to earn what the vote had not yet given. The formal declaration was read into the cooperative's record in all 49 member languages plus cooperative standard. And then, because ceremony mattered and had mattered for 1,000 years and would matter long after this day, a representative of each member species came forward and placed a marker. Each species marker different, each one a small artifact of their own culture and history, on the table in front of the human delegation. It was the cooperative's oldest tradition. The table, by the end, held 49 markers, ranging from a crystalline structure the size of a fist to a piece of metal worn smooth by generations of hands to a small sealed container that held, according to the Aquari representative who placed it with great gentleness, water from their home world's deepest ocean. Mura looked at the table for a long moment. Then she reached into the inner pocket of her uniform jacket and withdrew what the human delegation had brought for their own marker, a small disc of metal, unremarkable in appearance, that she placed among the others with both hands. "What is it?" Oren asked quietly beside her. "Aluminum," she said, "melted down from the hull of the first human spacecraft. The one that flew in 1969, ancient by our standards, extraordinary by the standards of what it meant." She looked at it, small among the others belonging. "We brought a piece of where we started," she said, "because this is where we arrived." Oren looked at the disc. Then he looked at the other 49 markers and then at Mura and then at the full table, the 1,000 years of it, the difficulty of it, the extraordinary stubborn hope of it. "Welcome," he said, "to the Galactic Cooperative, Admiral Mura. On behalf of everyone who has been part of this for 1,000 years, welcome." She looked at the table for another moment. She thought of Akafar, 2 decks below, watching this on a screen with the contained emotion of someone who had spent 30 years on a single thing and was watching it arrive. She thought of 200 years of preparation. She thought of the fleet at the border, patient and still. She thought of the question Oren had asked, what does humanity actually want, at the bottom of it, and her answer, and the fact that she had meant every word. She thought of a pale blue world at the edge of a galaxy that had called for 200 years, and a species that had taken its time, done its work, and finally answered. "Thank you," she said. And she meant that too, entirely from the bottom of something that did not have a simpler word than hope. The fleet at the border received the news 11 minutes after the vote. The time it took for the tight beam signal to cross the distance between the central station and the formation of 412 vessels holding position at the edge of monitored space. On the bridge of each of those ships, on the decks and in the corridors, and in the engineering bays and the medical wards, and the crew quarters of vessels that carried between them nearly 2 million human beings who had volunteered for this mission, and trained for years and flown to the edge of the known galaxy, and then waited, with the particular patience of people who understood what the waiting was for, The news arrived in 11 minutes. And what happened after that? Across a fleet of 412 vessels spread across a volume of space large enough to swallow solar systems, was not a single thing. It was 1,000 things, simultaneous and different and entirely human. Some people cheered. Some people cried. Some people stood very still and said nothing, because some things were too large for immediate response and needed a moment to settle before the reaction could be proportionate. In the fleet's hospital ships, the medical staff who had been on quiet duty during the long wait gathered in their break rooms and watched the announcement replay, and then went back to their stations, because the work didn't stop for history, even when history was happening. In the fleet's science vessels, the researchers who had spent the 18-month journey to the border organizing their data packages and preparing for the possibility that this day would come were already, within minutes of the announcement, beginning the process of reaching out to their counterparts in the cooperative scientific community, because there was so much to learn, and they had been waiting 200 years to start learning it. On the Enduring Promise, in his station 2 decks below the bridge, Dr. James Acaffer sat in front of his screen and watched the vote results with the tears running down his face completely unaddressed, because he was 70 years old and had spent 30 years on this, and the tears were appropriate, and he saw no reason to pretend otherwise. He sat there for a long time. Then he opened his communication terminal and sent a message to Admiral Mura on the station above. It said, "Constance. We did it," 3 words. He had prepared a longer message, several versions of it, drafted over the years in the quiet moments when he had let himself imagine this day. None of them seemed right now. 3 words were enough. They were, in fact, exactly right. Mura read the message at the reception that followed the vote, standing in the grand diplomatic hall with a drink she hadn't touched and 49 member species around her, and the accumulated weight of 1,000 years of something worth belonging to pressing gently against the inside of her chest. She read it and sent back 2 words. "We did." Then she put her communication terminal away and looked at the room, at Oren talking with Representative Fowl, at Councillor Sell, already deep in conversation with Volkov about the legal frameworks, at the Aquari representative, who had placed the water from their home world's ocean, and was now speaking with her xenobiology lead with the specific mutual fascination of scientists encountering new data. And she understood something that no briefing document had quite prepared her for. The data, the preparation, the 200 years, the fleet, the legal frameworks, the data packages, the 30 years of Acaffer's life and 12 years of her own, and the careers of 10,000 specialists who had worked on this mission, all of that had been necessary. Every bit of it. But it had been necessary to get to this room, to this moment, to the specific human experience of standing among 49 civilizations that had been here for 1,000 years, and finding that there was space for you, and that the space felt, despite everything, like something you had always been moving toward. She had a word for that feeling. Most humans did eventually when they found it. She picked up her drink. Across the room, Oren caught her eye and raised his glass in the Velhari gesture of mutual acknowledgement, a small motion, precise and genuine. She returned it. Outside the viewports, the stars were the same stars that had always been there, the same light, the same distances, the same ancient galaxy going about its ancient business of existing. But the relationship between those stars and the pale blue world at their edge had changed today, permanently and completely, and 200 years of patience had finally, exactly, been worth every day of the wait.